Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this evening, Human Rights Day. And we're so honored to have this opportunity to gather together with John, Tarek, Michael, all of you, to acknowledge this very important day at this incredibly difficult time. I just want to say I'm Jamelie Hassan. I am co-founder and curatorial advisor with Ron Benner, who's here, full-time companion and advocate and activist these days, along with the team of the Embassy Culture House. So we're very, very grateful for the opportunity to be here at Western and Queer Cinema for Palestine and Embassy Culture House. We're together in the first iteration in 2001 when John approached us. 2001. That's because I've got this catalog in my hand, which is actually from 21 years ago when we first collaborated with Michael Lynk and John and others. And it was Artists Against the Occupation. And it was held at the Forest City Gallery. So here we are, 21 years later. Michael, you had just arrived, I think, briefly a year before to London, Ontario, and we approached Michael and he wrote a piece. The project went from the Forest City Gallery to other cities in Canada, as well as to New York, to the United Nations. So the whole kind of relationship of solidarity and artist activism is very much at the heart of the work that we have been doing over these decades. And yeah, I'm basically like following in the footsteps of my parents. I was saying to John over dinner that my mom was in intensive care when Tarek and John were in prison in Cairo. And she saw the medical team coming in with their buttons for Tarek and John, to free Tarek and John. Everyone knew who Tarek and John were. They didn't need last names. And she said to the doctors and nurses, "Where did you get that? I want one of those." So even in the most critical moment for her at University Hospital, she was continuing her activism and set a very high bar for her children. So yeah, I am so thrilled to have you all here. And thank you for making the trip because you are on the, like the next morning, heading off to Baghdad, Iraq, where John has been doing, and will carry on doing workshops there. And we're going to see some more of your work and reflect on the film that we saw this afternoon. Some of you were able to see that photo booth. So it's just a really stunning film and brings together so many of the issues and the whole question around where we are today in terms of Gaza and the continued genocide. And that is one of the things that we decided in the beginning of the program, that we couldn't actually call this a festival, that we needed to change the language around Queer Cinema for Palestine. And on a Zoom call, we discussed it, and the idea would be that we would show our solidarity and recognize the genocide that was unfolding in Gaza. And so here we are. And I really hope that this evening gives us all strength and courage to go forward and to really find a way to get that ceasefire now. And one thing that really upsets me is that Muslim donors to the Liberal Party have said that if the ceasefire doesn't happen before January, they're going to pull their funding. What? Why do you need to wait until January? So I'm going to pass it over to co-coordinator Ira.
My name is Ira Kazi. I'm a contributing editor at ECH and also a grad student at Western. So I'm grateful that we have this opportunity to have this event on campus. Grateful and surprised, but very happy. So I'm just going to tell you briefly about Queer Cinema for Palestine, and then I will let Sara introduce a little bit about the Independent Jewish Voice, and then we can carry on. So tonight's event is part of Queer Cinema for Palestine, which started in 2021 as a solidarity initiative offering artists and art groups around the world a space to stand together using our art to oppose to ongoing violence of Israeli occupation. ECH actually participated in that 2021 event with a brilliant panel moderated by Wanda Nannybush, which is available on the ECH website if you want to stream it. It's called Land Trust. And this panel was actually part of more than a dozen events that were held around the world. As Jamelie said, we got rid of the word festival and we came up with a theme which was No Pride in Genocide. And this year's theme, I think, is it kind of covers it so well in so many various ways with the word pride and genocide. So this year we have 9 cities that are participating, including the other London in the UK, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Berlin, Amsterdam, Beirut, Seoul, and obviously us here tonight. And we are hosting the solidarity events with Palestinians in Gaza and across all of the historic Palestine and denouncing Israel's genocidal attacks and ethnic cleansing against millions of Palestinians. These events and the solidarity streamings that will happen afterwards are all going to be available on the Queer Cinema for Palestine's website and the Toronto Queer Film Festival site until December 17th. So share with your friends and families. And I just want to end by thanking our wonderful partners for this event, which includes the Department of Visual Arts, i.e. my department, Film Studies at Western. Both of these departments have been incredibly helpful. The People for Peace in London, Ontario, Independent Jewish Voices in London, Ontario, and the Queer Muslim Association. So thank you to everyone who worked so hard to make this happen tonight. And obviously, thank you to John, Michael, and Tarek. And I will pass the mic over to Sara Rands.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name's Sara Rands, and I'm from Independent Jewish Voices, and we're thrilled to support this event. Looking forward to hearing the chat, and wanted to tell you a little bit about our organization. We're a group of Jews of conscience who abhor the occupation and support ending it, a ceasefire, and finding a way forward so that both Israelis and Palestinians can thrive. We stand for BDS. We stand up for anti-racism and Indigenous solidarity, and we're justice-oriented. We have about 18 chapters across Canada. Some of them are on campus, some of them are cities, and we are proud to have been rallying, demonstrating, occupying train stations with our Palestinian allies, and we wouldn't have it any other way. So that's Independent Jewish Voices. If you're interested, see me after.
Okay, I'll give this mic to John. Thank you guys so much for both organizing the event and for allowing me to introduce these 2 lovely gentlemen with whom I've had quite a long and rich history. I'm going to start with you, John. I think I kind of have to as my fellow cellmate. I think when I reflect on some of the most difficult experiences in my life, one of them was when we were at the welcoming party in Egypt, and the guards had come and started beating me, and you jumped literally on top of my body while yelling, "Kennedy, Kennedy," as though if they knew we were Canadian, that would stop it. And of course, they beat the shit out of you as a result. And I often reflect on that in a life of lots of difficult experiences, you know, that selflessness that you had. And one of the happiest experiences of my life was day 45 of jail, which I don't know if you remember, but I woke up. Actually, I was woken up by John because he was pushing some paper stuff towards my face. Do you remember this now, John? And it was a little chess set that he had found the paper for from, I think it was toilet paper rolls, and cut together so that he could make me a chess set, because it was all I wanted to do was play chess in this fucking hellhole. I really appreciated it, of course, and it was one of the many bonding moments we had over 2 months together. When I watched your movie, I saw some of the themes that you talked about while we were in jail. You know, you said, I'm thinking of this movie, and it's about space penguins. And of course, a science kid like me has no capacity to conceptualize art at the John Greyson level. I went home, I watched all of his movies, and I realized, wow, I do not understand gay cinema. Except for one, to which nobody had the rights at that time, right? All of this to say that John is not just an incredibly accomplished filmmaker, he's also a delightful human being who would probably jump on a grenade for you too. You know, he barely knew me when he did that.
I went and yelled Canada, Canada, Canada. I've learned my lesson.
That's right. The film, though, was really touching. It was my second time watching it today. It was much more painful to watch today because it felt prophetic, knowing that it hasn't just been made in the last year or two, but over the last decade. I was wondering if you could sort of comment on two things. One is why it's so prophetic. I don't know if you've thought of it as such. And the other one is whether you were trying to tell a story in the future, or if you were just trying to tell a story of the present with your movie.
I think the eerie thing about a film that touches on 14 years of Palestine solidarity is that inevitably it returns to Gaza again and again. And the bombing campaigns that occupied those 14 years, I think there were four discrete, 2009, 2014, I'm not going to get the chronology. You guys will help
18,
me with
18, 21, 22, 23.
Exactly. And so the eeriness of Jericho standing in, symbolically standing in for Gaza, and the metaphor of Jericho being taken from the Bible. And the part that everyone forgets is, of course, that after they blow their horns and it's all sort of cuddly and cute and the walls fall down, then they go in and slaughter every citizen. And that having that Jericho story reintroduced into the present day headlines has a different weight than we've experienced before, because I think unlike 2014, 2009, 2021, 2018, this one's a turning point that none of us can see the end of yet, or see the scale of yet. It's a different level. It's a new Nakba. It's a different level of devastation, dispossession, slaughter. So I think that the goal was always to tell a film which told a very simple story. It was a story of queer solidarity over those 14 years, and just looked at micro on the ground at York University in Toronto, different efforts that were made by incredible, inspiring activists of all stripes who came together with this shared commitment to express solidarity with Palestine. And I have to say, today, both Embassy Cultural House and in the impossible search for hope, Embassy Cultural House and Queer Cinema for Palestine both do give me hope right now. little glimmers of hope about a way forward. There's a project here that has legs and that means something, that's making a difference.
Yeah, thank you so much. Michael, I'll also tell a little anecdote about us, which is that I think you lied for me the first time I met you, saying that you had known me for a little bit longer than you did because my father had stolen my passport so I couldn't go to Iraq. And Michael bailed me out of this predicament. And I think
it wasn't a lie, it was a stretch of the truth. Okay? I'm a lawyer, and I'm bound to follow the rules of ethics.
Another time that really sticks in my mind when we were together was when this Israeli activist at the United Nations got up, looked at you, looked at me and said, "What the hell are they feeding you guys in London?" And seeing this table of London locals in this room here, you got to think it's something. Back then, I was there to talk about, to the Commission of Inquiry about getting shot and targeting of medical professionals. You were there explaining a lot of the legalities as the Special Rapporteur. As Special Rapporteur, I think you were significant. You were particularly reviled by lots of the pro-Israeli voices because you didn't just tell the story of Palestinians, which was important and will always be important, but you also created a legal framework that showed how the occupation is in violation of international laws. And I was shocked through some of our conversations that nobody had really done that legwork before you. Nobody had said, let us talk about all the ways in which this is illegal, or asking the question, is it illegal? You know, just a little spoiler, yes, very fucking illegal. When you were talking then, I don't think you or I, you know, to come back to the idea of the prophetic nature of some of the work that you two men have done, I don't think you could have realized all of the ways in which international humanitarian law, as you were articulating it, the occupation as you were defining it, and all of the different tactics of the Israelis and strategies would be weaponized and manipulated going forward. So I'm also curious, as you were doing that work, same kind of question as to John, like, did you know that the Israelis could do this? Did you see that there could be a line from what you were observing as violations and what we're seeing today?
I became Special Rapporteur in 2016, and it's a 6-year appointment. And when I was appointed, I said to myself, I'm going to stick to international humanitarian law, which is the laws of war and of occupation. Virtually every country in the world has said this is an occupation, except for Israel. Every country in the world, except for Israel, has said annexation of occupied territory is illegal under international law. And virtually every country in the world had said, and still says today, that the Israeli settlements are a flagrant violation under international law. So I thought all I had to do during my 6 years as Special Rapporteur was simply go to these countries, the influential countries in the global north, and say, hey, you know, there's also these issues of accountability, of impunity. Israel is an outlier with respect to international law. You've said so yourself in the resolutions you voted for, or the framework of law that you've accepted. All I thought I had to do was persuade, you know, the Germanys or United Kingdoms or United States or Canadas of the world to say, look, you know, the logic is glaringly obvious. The law is so straightforward on this. Let's do something. And I began to realize in my 3rd or 4th or 5th year of the mandate that nothing was happening. In fact, most of the global north was doubling down with respect to a refusal to want to put any of this law into action. And I began to realize this enormous divide between the global north and the global south. And we see this so evidently in the last 60 days. And we see this so evidently in what happened at the Security Council on Friday, when 13 countries voted in favor of an immediate ceasefire. The United Kingdom abstained, and the United States, as a permanent member, was able to exercise its veto to block the resolution. And where and a huge number of countries in the global South had actually signed on to in support of the resolution that was presented by the United Arab Emirates there. So I began to realize I had to talk within the language of law, of international law, but in a much more direct, forward, demanding fashion. So I wrote a report which said this occupation is illegal. And I wasn't the first, but I was among the first, and certainly the first within the UN system, to say the occupation is illegal. And I recommend that the General Assembly ask the International Court of Justice in The Hague, the highest court in the UN system, for an advisory opinion on this. And I sat and waited, and I began to speak to the Palestinian, official Palestine, and they slowly came around to the idea. And then this time last year, December 2022, Palestine puts forth a resolution at the General Assembly saying, we want the International Court of Justice to answer questions on advisory opinion as to whether or not, among other things, the occupation has become illegal because, number one, Israel has annexed land, which is not only a violation of international law, it's a war crime. Two, Israel has been denying Palestinian self-determination, which is probably the foremost of all human rights. And number three, Israel has enforced and encased a systematic form of discrimination known as apartheid. And I use the A word, and I've probably done about 150 interviews since October 7th, a lot of it by mainstream press. And invariably, they will ask me as their last question, but Professor Lynk, you've said that Israel's practicing apartheid, as if I was to be ashamed of it. And I said, yeah, apartheid is a very harsh term, but this is a very harsh situation. And I explain in 2 sentences or 3 sentences why it was appropriate under international law to be able to say that. So I think I issued 12 reports as Special Rapporteur, and the 2 I think have had the greatest impact is the one on illegal occupation, because now that's going to be argued in front of the International Court of Justice in 2 months' time in the middle of February. And I have a very good feeling about this, that the court will probably say this is an illegal occupation, and that's going to make it that much harder for particularly the global north to continue to say, let Israel choose its own time as when it's going to deal with the Palestinians. And I also said this was apartheid. And I wasn't the first to say that, but I think that's now probably the wall-to-wall conclusion of the international human rights movement, that this is apartheid. It still hasn't quite moved into mainstream discussion yet, but it's getting there with all this. And the last thing I want to say is, yes, today is the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But I also want to point out that the United Nations was very busy that week. On the 9th of December, 1948, 75 years ago yesterday, the international community, through the General Assembly, adopted the Genocide Convention. And tomorrow, the 75th anniversary of the adoption of UN Resolution 194, which endorsed the Palestinian right of return. So for all that the UN gets blamed for, it set forth 3 important declarations, all of which have great pertinence today when we talk about Israel and Palestine in 3 successive days.
Do you think that the international community has upheld the visions of those declarations?
When it comes to Palestine, no. And in fact, I would recommend to any of you the UN humanitarian officer in Jerusalem today is a Canadian lawyer named Lynn Hastings. I've known her for probably 7 or 8 years. And Israel had told her earlier on this week that she's now persona non grata, and she has to be out of Israel by the end of the month. And she issued today, on the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a very pointed comment and very responsible language. And she said at the end of the day, this shouldn't be happening on the 75th anniversary. I mean, if we've had 75 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, by far the single most important moral, political, and legal statement with respect to the protection of universal human rights for everybody, and it's not being protected today in many places, but including and most acutely in Palestine, then she says we have little to celebrate.
Thank you for that. John, you had a scene where you were talking about what happened to Dan Freeman Malloy in terms of his rustication and so on, and some of the counter response to that. Could you talk a little bit about what you were thinking when putting that scene in? And obviously, you were not just a dispassionate observer. You were an active participant in the entire episode. So tell us more about it.
The way I met Dan was when he got rusticated. Dan was an incredible undergraduate student at that time at York University, where I taught. I'd just been hired. And we learned that simply for doing Palestine Solidarity in Very Hall, he had been sent to the country to think on the errors of his ways, in that old Victorian turn of phrase that our president, in her wisdom, decided to use. And so a bunch of us the next 2 days later formed a megaphone choir. His crime had been to use an unauthorized amplification device when he was staging with comrades a mock checkpoint to give people moving through campus the experience of what a checkpoint is like. And this was in response, crucially, I'm going into micro detail because it's actually worth remembering. It was in response to our university, York University, declaring IDF Appreciation Day, Israeli Defense Forces Appreciation Day. What is York University appreciating about the IDF? Well, I guess ask Heather Reisman. But it's all to say...
She was a funder of York at that point, or just in general?
I'm being more trying to tie it up to recent headlines.
All right.
But I think the crucial thing, you were asking us both about being prophetic, and I think it's the opposite. I think Michael's work in such brilliant detail, my own attempts in the film, are to make a record of how at various points silencing has occurred, weaponization of speech has occurred, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, the weaponization of an entire vocabulary that we use. Words like apartheid, one of our campaigns with Queers Against Israeli Apartheid back in 2010 was to march with placards which had quotes by Jimmy Carter using the A word, and Bishop Tutu using the A word, and all the historic figures you can imagine, including famously several Israelis using the A word, saying we're descending into an apartheid state if we continue on this path. So nothing about this current moment of silencing is new, but it does, I think, by understanding and knowing our past, we can also identify how it is distinct. There are things going on now that have never happened before. It's university presidents being dismissed simply for making common sense statements. We're in a different world right now.
And was that the same idea, the weaponization of language, that brought you to the West Side Story piece as well?
Yeah. So the
West Bank side, sorry.
And this will tell you how long I was working on the film. When we dreamt up our version of West Side Story, which became West Bank Story, there was not even a hint that Spielberg and Kushner were going to weigh in, but luckily they did, and so we could do our split screen antics of comparing the past and the present. But in that particular case, it was trying to find a way to talk about a history of the criminalization of BDS and set it to a tune. So I'm looking for our hosts. I don't know if, because so many of you tonight have already seen the film, and we could play a clip, or we could just, but has everyone seen it?
Play a clip.
Okay, play the clip. It's quick. It's quick. West Side Story, West Bank Story.
In 1957, 4 queer Jewish artists created West Bank Story. 3 were lefties who fought McCarthy's Blacklist. The other one named names after the House on Un-American Activities Committee threatened to out him as gay. Over the past decade, the pro-BDS gang were gaining victories around the globe, so the pro-Israel gang fought back, pushing draconian anti-BDS laws.
We have to be united in fighting back against BDS.
Divestment or sanctions or whatever, or boycott against a country that, when all is said and done, is the only democracy in the region.
Israel has a right to defend itself. You have thousands of rockets flying into your territory.
Dear bulldozer Mike, you're clearly on a roll. You love to ban in silence and out and stop control. You thrive on double standards. You moralize free speech. Suppress dissent. What a prayer to preach.
The new anti-Semitism features the 3 Ds. That's why a movement like BDS, or the so-called Israel Apartheid Week, has no place in Canada.
You McCarthy loser gonna stick up that house. You're opportunistic, a pandering bro. Knows Roger now a BB bro.
Responding to boycott calls from Palestinians, Ahava, Veolia, SodaStream, and G4S pull out of illegal Israeli settlements. Canada's Green Party and 100-plus student unions, including York, endorse BDS. Thousands of artists and scholars, many...
Okay, thank you for that. I guess in terms of that particular clip, it talks a lot about BDS, which is probably not a movement that has been necessarily helped or hindered over the last 2 months. However, I want to talk about anti-Semitism, which is very much in a parallel track to BDS. Have we lost the fight for the term anti-Semitism?
It's Justin Potter, for instance, wonderful colleague and comrade, has just made that argument quite brilliantly in his anti-empire. Help me with the blog name for people.
He now calls it the Anti-Genocide Project or something like that.
Okay, yeah. But I think that analysis of language, where we actually recognize those turning points where we lose control of language. I think in a related move, Naomi Klein in Doppelganger talking about how the left over the past decade has lost so much of the language we've used to mobilize and to critique. And that appropriation, that very willful appropriation and extraordinarily aggressive appropriation by a growing, accelerating right wing, means that, yeah, we're losing words, we're losing language. But it doesn't. These things aren't fixed. We know language keeps evolving. These things aren't static, and there are ways, like the reclaiming of queer, to change language, to transform language within a lifetime.
Thank you. Michael, one of the 3 Ds that was up there that Trudeau was talking about was delegitimization. And definitely there have been efforts for delegitimization, I would say, on both sides, people trying to delegitimize Israel as the current existing state, but also against the United Nations. Does the United Nations have any legitimacy today?
You know, again, this really becomes like a global north, global south question. In the global south, the United Nations is seen as the entirely appropriate international forum to resolve major issues in international affairs, especially with respect to Palestine. Keep this in mind. You know, Palestine was the first major issue in 1947 to come onto the agenda of the United Nations. It was the first major decision that it made through its partition resolution in November of 1947. And arguably, it's its first major blunder. And here we are 76 years later, after the partition resolution was adopted. And we're still dealing with Palestine at the very top of the UN agenda. The United Nations General Assembly has said repeatedly in resolutions year after year that the United Nations has a permanent responsibility, that's the term, with respect to the question of Palestine until it's settled and resolved satisfactorily in all of its aspects.
But the United Nations cannot do that because so long as the United States will veto, the United Nations cannot solve this problem. I mean, there was a resolution proffered yesterday. Was it yesterday? No, 2 days ago. Is this? I guess. Yeah, I want to hear your feedback on that. But also, I guess the secondary comment is, I've been thinking about the League of Nations and its collapse. Is this the moment for the collapse of the United Nations? Because it's not fit for purpose?
No, I mean, my sense is the United Nations is a solid enough and respected enough institution by most parts of the world that it will continue. And it will remain a forum for the question of Palestine to be debated. The question is whether or not the United Nations will remain simply an arena for debate, or is it going to become an actor for resolution with respect to this? And of course, we're living with the headache or the hangover of the division of powers at the end of the Second World War. The Security Council was created initially as 11 members, a little bit later on as 15, but with 5 permanent members representing the powers that be at the end of the Second World War who had vetoes. Let's talk about Friday. Friday was the 5th time in the last 9 weeks that the United Nations Security Council, the highest decision-making body in the international system, has debated a resolution with respect to, it's the 6th time that it's debated a resolution with respect to the Israeli assault on Gaza. The United States vetoed 2 of those resolutions back in October, which called for a ceasefire. It eventually abstained on a resolution which talked about a truce, a temporary humanitarian pause. And then on Friday, it vetoed the resolution on a 13-to-1 vote, as I had mentioned before. Since 1973, for the last 5 decades, the United States has issued 85 vetoes at the Security Council. That's more than twice as many as the next permanent 5-member, Russia and the Soviet Union, has issued in terms of vetoes. Of those 85 vetoes, 45 have been in defense of Israel. It's issued more vetoes on Israel than in any other issue over the last 5 decades. No other of the 5 permanent members has ever issued a single veto in defense of Israel. So it's this diplomatic shield that gives Israel the impunity, the confidence, and the brazenness, I guess, to be able to continue on with the occupation, continue on with this assault on Gaza, despite the appalling civilian numbers, despite overwhelming international opinion. And the United States feels, I suppose, bound to be able to protect Israel in these circumstances. I mean, we can contrast the comments between Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who talks about Israel, we're asking them to obey humanitarian law, and they've got to be more careful with respect to civilian casualties. And then on Friday, the same day as it vetoed the resolution, the Department of State issues an order bypassing Congress, because it doesn't want to debate, to send $106 million worth of tank shells to Israel, because Israel's run out of tank shells shelling South Gaza with respect to this.
Okay, thank you. I want to dive in more, but I also want to give the audience a chance to speak. So if you guys want to put your hands up, I'll make a bit of a mental list and then come through the audience with the mic. So who'd like to ask a question?
And also, Tarek, short, also resonance.
Okay, why don't we play the short while you guys think of questions? I see one question here. Anybody else want to put their name in for a question while we're taking now? Okay, think of your questions. We'll play this short and then we'll get to the question period.
John, do you want to say a few words about...
I can just briefly introduce Razan's short film. Razan is a Palestinian-Canadian filmmaker based in Montreal, teaching at Concordia. was part of our Core Cinema for Palestine efforts both last year and this year, and also as a curator of Regard Palestinian, which was censored in Montreal. They were trying to screen work 2 weeks ago, were censored by their theater. The program was pulled the same day. And so Razan and Mohammed and her comrades have been mobilizing, trying to find new venues to screen their work. And so we wanted to include Razan's voice as part of today. So this is a short film that they made a few years ago.
هذا هو المفرق. وعيالي أنا طيف مشهور، بس كان في بير عميق خلق فيه أبوك، ضلينا نسحب فيه خلق عمره 100 سنة زي النكبة، خلقت عمرها 100 سنة تمام. تقاطع شارع الكولونيل البريطاني بالستانلي وشارع البرج، يعني تقاطع التاريخ بين الاستعمار وفلسطين. امشي خلينا ندور على البيت. لو كنت ماشي على رجلي أكيد كنت لقيته، حتى لو بطل موجود. بس هيك خايفة ما الاقيه. ما فيناش نفوت لجوا؟ طيب حدور على أمين، أكيد لساته بيلعب على البسكليت على البلكون. أمين ماما، وينك حبيبي؟ أمين لو تسأليه ما بيتذكرش إشي من طفولته بحيفا إلا البسكليت على البلكون اللي كان يطل عليه. مين هذه الست؟ بعرفها؟ لكاتهم هدول الشباب معاهم سلم. خلينا نطلع ندور على أمين، بركي نفوت على البيت كمان. أمين مش عم بلاقيه ولا عم بلاقي البيت. فجروا 112 بيت يوم واحد من بعد ما رحلونا. كيف اليوم؟ كل شي محمود، والأسامي غيروها. منيح أمين بعده اسمه أمين ما تغيرش. شارع شفات سيون، تحرير بالعكس، مش بنضحي. ما الاستعمار هو اللي سلمها البلد. حتى حيفا صارت هيفا ولا خيفا. بحر حمص يا جماعة، حسنا فيه. ليش رجعتيني لهون وأنا مانيش قادرة أحس بهالمكان؟ مانيش قادرة أشوفه حتى، هني عمالي يفرجوني إياه. خذيني عمي، بركي ألاقي أمين وأبو أمين هناك. هي السفينة البريطانية اللي أخذتنا على بيروت. إيش معنى الناس؟ طالعين يشموا هوا؟ أمين؟ أبو أمين؟ كأنه شكلن أجانب جايين يتسوحوا. أنا مش فهمانة. إحنا عم نتقوص ونتهجر شايفينها سياحة؟ إيش مالها هذه الهبلة بتصور بالعسكر؟ وينك أمين؟ أمين ماما أخيرا لقيتك. يلا حبيبتي لازم نمشي. أمين أمين أخيرا لقيتك. خديني على البحر قلتلك. وما قلنا غير البحر. ما فيش مطبخ. لازم أرجع قبل ما السما تاخدني. ما فيش مطبخ.
Okay, that was painful to watch, of course. For many of us, for me, whose grandmother had told stories exactly like that, especially as she was growing older, more demented, receding back into her past. Okay. Let's start with some questions. If anybody has any questions, let me know. I'm going to start here, but if you have questions, just put your hands up so I can make a mental plan. Just over here.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with people. I have a question for Michael Lynk, which is, it's sort of it's not a what-if question. It is kind of a what-if question. If the Security Council resolution had gone differently on Friday, first of all, it would have been huge because it would have meant that the U.S. did not veto, and that would have been astonishing. But if the Security Council resolution had passed, what would have happened aside from the monumental turnaround by the U.S., which would change a lot?
So your question is, what would have happened had the U.S. Either abstained or voted in favor of the resolution such that it would have passed the Security Council? The resolution was incredibly short. Usually resolutions of the Security Council are 2, 3, 5 pages. This is probably a third of a page long. But the key words were an immediate, durable ceasefire, or something to that effect. And if that had happened, then the expectation would have been that the U.S. would have had to do something. Keep in mind that the Security Council used to pass resolutions quite regularly critical of Israel. I think there were something like 15 resolutions passed critical of Israel during the 12 years of Ronald Reagan and George Bush I. The important thing to remember is that the U.S. never pushed for any enforcement of these resolutions. There have been a number of resolutions which said this is an occupation. and the Fourth Geneva Convention applies. Israel doesn't. So that's passed with U.S. consent. Nothing happened with respect to that. There have been a number of resolutions which said the formal annexation by Israel of East Jerusalem and parts of the West Bank in 1967 and then again in 1980 are null and void and a violation of international law. Nothing happened. The U.S. didn't do anything to allow the Security Council to put that into force. Same thing is true with the 8 or 9 resolutions that have been passed by the Security Council with respect to the illegality of the Israeli settlements. So if there had been a U.S. saying yes, this is going to be a ceasefire, I think that would have meant Israel would have had to stop, because it would have meant the United States would have not given the $106 million worth of tank shells, and the Israel realizing it had lost its diplomatic protection. But keep this in mind, and I didn't finish the thought. In the last 15 years, since February of 2000 since February of 2009, almost 15 years, there's only been one resolution adopted at the Security Council critical of Israel. And that was at the last few weeks of the Obama administration in December 2016, saying that the settlements were a flagrant violation under international law. One resolution in 15 years. So it means that the United States has, if you like, double down or triple down in terms of its support of Israel, of its building an even stronger diplomatic shield at the one international body which really counts in terms of international decision-making with regards to this. So, and Obama only allowed that to pass because he was less than 3 weeks left in his administration. No resolutions critical of Israel were passed during Donald Trump's administration, and the only other time that before October 7th, that a resolution critical of Israel was proposed under Joe Biden was in February of this year, when the new far right-wing government of Israel announced that they were going to be doubling or tripling the number of housing units in these illegal Israeli settlements. The United States threatened to veto that resolution, even though it was going to be using the same language as the other 8 or 9 prior resolutions already adopted by the Security Council on the settlements. And instead, there was a presidential statement from the president of the Security Council, which was exceptionally watered down and which made no mention of the illegality of the Israeli settlements. So this gives you, I think, an idea of how potent American power is with respect to protecting Israel. But you also have to understand, because you see these comments being made recently both by Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and by Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, recognizing that support for Israel is virtually nil in the international community, and support for the United States is draining rapidly because of their ironclad presence. And there was a report in Today, which I'm sure was leaked by the Americans, something to the effect of that Biden has told Israel they have to wrap this up by the end of the month. And Israel has been talking about months or years in order to be able to cleanse Gaza of Hamas. So in effect, the United States has borne the embarrassment of being the only hand up of the 15 to vote against this resolution. And it's recognizing that it's going to have to call an end to this if it's going to retain any remaining shreds of credibility.
Thank you. Okay, Allison, and then you in the back, and then you. Allison.
I'm going to try to ask a question. Yeah, John, just coming out of that film, so I'm new to all of this, Palestine, Israel, all of it. And coming out of the film, we were just commenting on there's so much structure to pay attention to. And that's what I'm still gravitating towards, is the structure of it. But then there's a story. There's a story that you're also trying to tell. So I just wonder about from this perspective that I'm in of just being new, and I was just told a story, I'm not quite sure. And this structure, what is important to bring me back into this moment so I can leave this room and continue what is important to pay attention to. And then secondly, I don't know what the question is here, but I think of AI. Just with that film was Google Maps, and there's so much future in yours, and they're using AI now. I don't know what the question is there, but those are my thoughts.
I think with Razan's film, the poignancy is all about the only camera she can access is the Google Street View. She can't go there, and that's the poignancy that's unspoken but underwrites the entire film and breaks your heart as you listen to her voiceover. And so, the whole world can see the place she can't go to, her home. So everything about that formal choice returns back to the story she's telling. And with ours, we were trying to tell a story of what can innovative queer activism look like. And, it's a satire, so it's out there. So the idea of infiltrating, naked gay penguins infiltrating the Eurovision Song Contest and rewriting a weaponized song getting Genet and sidekick Hamza to rip off their masks and denounce Israeli apartheid. Well, that stands for, I think, a generation of activism that we've seen around the globe. And I sort of want to throw it back to Tarek right now, because Tarek notoriously, I want to call you Mr. Ketchup from now on, because you've notoriously just done an incredibly effective act of civil disobedience that's really reverberated and really caught imagination and spoken. And you had your night in jail for your efforts. But we also saw the next week the terrifying 4 a.m. raids on people who had done the exact same thing. Theirs was with paint. Maybe if they had used ketchup, maybe they wouldn't have had a 4 a.m. raid. I don't think so, because what's going on is, of course, different responses in different cultural contexts, and the particular will to raid homes of 11 activists at 4 a.m. simply because they dared to take on Indigo Chapters and Heather Reisman. It's an extraordinary indictment of the moment we're in. So I want to ask you about, you claim to be not an artist, and yet I think you just made an incredibly effective act of cultural intervention. So I do want to ask you, do you see hope in terms of using culture to fight back in Palestine solidarity?
Okay, so to start with, the ketchup thing is allegations, not yet proven in court.
On the advice of my lawyer.
I think what made that action overall effective, whoever might have done the ketchup thing, was, for one, it was a strong visual. The relationship of ketchup to blood is a very easy one to see. But the other one was that it scratched at and forced back the fragility of the people who we were talking about. And so it was a concept that was definitely not something I came up with, but was delivered to me by our brothers, sisters, and siblings in the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was really struggling to understand what was happening until I related white fragility into it. And so what we did was we really triggered this severe response, which was, on the face of it, ridiculous, and completely ridiculous by any analysis, over ketchup. And in so doing, we exposed several important things. Within the Palestine movement, a lot of people have not been involved with police before. They didn't know police are not your friend. Many people did not know that. And the other thing is that these politicians do not care about you. They really are so vain and so superficial. So I think when I see your film, when I see lots of Michael's work, what you guys are doing very much is trying to communicate messages, and really, I think that action just falls into the same framework. I mean, I slept literally, I was your big spoon for 50 days, so I hope I learned some lessons. And that's literally true. We had no space at all, so we were cuddled the whole time. Okay, let's go back there. No, if we could go further back, 2 more, and then to you, and then to you.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, if I may. So first, for Michael Lynk, I think just following up on a lot of what you've said today, I want to ask you about kind of reimagining international diplomacy, because you're giving us some indication that the United States has so much to influence. But I personally see that as a very a lopsided system of negotiation. And so my question lies in going forward and trying to prevent these kind of atrocities. Like, how are we looking at imagining how diplomacy and negotiation works in the international sphere?
Okay, could you ask your second question as well, and then we'll tackle them both?
My second question is for Dr. Greyson. Yeah, I saw the documentary and it was fantastic. And I wanted to ask you about, I guess, decentering whiteness in queer movements, and particularly how that plays, how that plays by non-Jewish observers who are white, and what role they play in centering whiteness and in pinkwashing.
Sure. So you've asked me, given we've got this, your term, a very appropriate term, lopsided structure at the Security Council, where the United States can effectively ignore or shield Israel from international opinion, how do we move forward and try to find a just resolution with respect to Israel and Palestine? Obviously there's no easy answers with regards to this. I know I can talk all day long with respect to international law and how clear it is that there is no human rights crisis in the modern world where international law on the one hand has spoken so clearly, so consistently, so urgently with respect to the rights of the Palestinians and to an end to the occupation. Yet there is this enormous gap between promise and performance with regards to this. I can remember having conversations with young Palestinians in Geneva, in Amman, where I talked about the value of international law as an important political campaign tool. Because when you argue convincingly that international law is on your side, that should sway public opinion in campaigns to support Palestine. And they would say back to me, show me where it works with regards to this. And one day I had a young Palestinian studying law, in fact, who told me, he pointed out that the 3 times that Israel has withdrawn completely from occupied Arab territory, from the Egyptian Sinai in 1982, from South Lebanon in 2000, from Gaza, at least removing the troops in 2005. Though all 3 of those came after bitter either military campaigns or armed resistance. And the presence of the PA today in these cities in the West Bank is because of the first Palestinian Intifada. He says, you can't show me a situation where Israel has withdrawn from territory that it did so willingly under ordinary peace negotiations. It always came after the application of force. I didn't have an answer after that. He kind of took my tongue away with respect to that. But let me tell you this. International law combined with international resolve is what makes our legal system internationally wind up working. So it needs, if you like, the unspoken superpower in the world, which is public opinion and civil society and non-governmental organizations pushing this. So it seems like a bleak uphill battle, and it is uphill. I don't think it's bleak. I learned early on when I was Special Rapporteur, I would give a 40-minute lecture on the situation in Palestine, on the application of international law and its non-enforcement. And I realized I was leaving the audiences at the end wanting to cut their wrists, slit their wrists. It was a bleak story, and I understood, if I'm going to tell that kind of story, I have to end off with something positive. And the positive thing I always would end off with is the work that I was involved with, looking and allying with Palestinian human rights organizations opposed to the occupation, and Israeli human rights organizations opposed to the occupation as well. They spoke the same human rights language. They used the same common measuring stick to judge everybody's action. And they're the future. They're the bridge to a new, better, if you like, society based on the cornerstones of equality and democracy and human rights and self-determination. So and it gives me hope when I see, in Israel, how these Israeli human rights organizations are, in spite of the tide of public opinion within Israeli society, Israeli Jewish opinion against them, yet they are active in wanting to be able to defend and advance these rights. So that's what I would say back to, with respect to your question.
Thank you. John?
Your question was about the centrality of an anti-racist analysis within Palestine solidarity, and particularly queer Palestine solidarity. And I think the answer is simple. It comes from PACB. It comes from the Palestinian Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. When Queer Cinema for Palestine is a PACB project, and when October 7th happened, we were in the midst, we'd already set our program in July, August. We were ready to roll out on the schedule, and then October 7th happened, and we went back to PACB and said, completely understand if we need to postpone, if we need to push, etc. Maybe now is not the right time. And the answer that came back very clearly and unequivocally was, no, this is exactly the right time. This is exactly the message that the sort of work that needs to be done to counter and to inflect this incredibly monstrous moment. But I think crucial to PACB's work has also been their anti-racist analysis from the get-go. And they've always insisted on centering anti-racism as a core principle, which includes anti-Semitism. And when we talk about losing the term, PACB's answer back is we'll always be fighting anti-Semitism as part of an anti-racist analysis, where we also center, of course, anti-Palestinian racism. And I think one of the triumphs of the past, not just the past 2 months, but the past year, has been an increasingly powerful public discourse around anti-Palestinian racism.
Okay, we'll do one more question, and then we'll start wrapping up.
Yeah, I'll make it brief because it's mainly been addressed, but I just wanted to say, address this situation. A friend was here for the screening and had to leave, and she said how profoundly helpful it was to be able to think differently about the things she's seeing every day in the news, to have a kind of different way to think through things. And I guess I also was wondering, Michael, I think at the beginning of being involved in this issue, it's like I remember really just grasping onto the notion of the international law as an absolute kind of safety net, thinking it would save me somehow. And I think, John, your film just really destabilizes that completely and makes us have to think at it. And I think I guess I just find that structurally the film is really amazing and could be only made by someone who was living this struggle for 15 or more years, because it's in there, and the complexity that you've opened up a complex situation even more and then made us feel it as well as think through it. You too, Tarek, and I agree. I think you are a performance artist masquerading as a doctor. That's what I've decided.
Here. I'll say very briefly, to agree 100% in terms of culture culture obviously offering us an alternative to the devastating headlines. And one excellent place to look for culture this month is queercinemaforpalestine.org, where all the programs offered globally, including this one, are available for free. Click on them and they're streamable. So until December 17th. Thanks.
Okay, since that was a short one and David promises another short one,
So the beauty of ketchup as opposed to red paint or even blood is that it's both, the beauty of ketchup is that it's both sticky and sweet. And the hope is that it will stick to the member for London North Centre until at least the next election. But it's also sticky as an idea because people don't need to be told to, for example, mail free to their member of parliament little takeout envelopes of ketchup. This is literally a crowdsourced idea. And people don't need to be told to bring bottles of ketchup every week in their weekly vigils at the constituency office. It is literally crowdsourced ketchup. But another sticky idea that needs to stick to this member, who I won't mention, is the idea of Canada as a middle power who can't do anything. We hear a lot about that here and elsewhere. And in all the votes that you mentioned, Michael, there is this great asymmetry between the North and the South, but you've missed the fact that Canada stands with the South when we stand with other mighty middle powers like Nauru and Palau and Micronesia. And I've often thought of the last few decades as the Micronization of Canada's international stature, right? So I'd like Michael, but all of you to comment on, because you all travel internationally, this idea that Canada used to have a certain stature and we've become this international middle dwarf. And nothing against small countries, but it really is a weird status to have, nothing against dwarves or small countries, but it's just a very weird status to be.
Michael, you want to comment on that for a moment?
Look, when it comes to Israel and Palestine, Canada definitely punches way below its weight with respect to this. And I can trace that, during the Chrétien years, Canada at least either voted in favor or abstained on the large basket of resolutions that came to the General Assembly every November and December with respect to Palestinian rights. And Canada has a stated policy that was drafted 30 years ago in the Chrétien years with respect to the laws of occupation apply, two-state solution, settlements are a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and every resolution that now comes before the UN General Assembly annually reiterates all of those themes. And I saw, actually, when the preliminary vote was taken on the settlements resolution in November at the Fourth Committee of the General Assembly, which is a preliminary vote, Canada voted against, and two former Canadian ambassadors released their statements saying, what is Canada saying? This is against everything that Canada says are their values with respect to this. And the full-blown list of negative votes by Canada started with Martin, was deepened by Stephen Harper, and has been continued by Justin Trudeau. And that is a contributing reason why Canada under Stephen Harper lost its bid for Security Council seat in 2010, and why Canada under Justin Trudeau lost its bid for a Security Council seat in 2020. The only two things that really changed when Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister 8 years ago with respect to Israel and Palestine was the tone changed in the commentary. It wasn't so belligerently pro-Israeli. And Trudeau restored funding to UNRWA, which is important, though it's now starting to decrease the amount of funding going to UNRWA. Aside from that, very little has changed with respect to Canadian policy.
Okay, thank you very much. As we start to wind down, I'm going to ask you guys to answer one more question. It's now been 65 days since the war on Gaza has begun, of course, the events on October 7th. What is one thing that has given you a tremendous amount of hope in the last 65 days? It could be either one event, one memory, or something that sort of runs through more abstractly. Start with you, John, and then we'll close with you, Michael.
I have to say Grand Central Station. I think I don't think I'm ever going to forget that YouTube moment. And I had friends who were there, and they were the ones who had alerted me. So it had that personal connection, and I was searching for them in the crowd. But I think actions like that speak back in such powerful ways in terms of seizing space, seizing land, seizing the narrative. And I think we need more Grand Central stations. I'm sorry to invoke an American example, and we've got our own. I think the demonstrations. Every time I've gone to a demonstration, starting at the U.S. Embassy on University and watching the people arrive, and there's that acceleration. It's like an extraordinary image. We've all seen it. We've all been part of it, of the arrival at the demonstration, which it never ceases to move me. So I think there are those moments of hope that come from the demonstrations themselves.
The solidarity given by the Global South. I mean, I'm pleased and proud of the demonstrations we've seen in London, in Paris, in Toronto, and in Washington. But it's the unrelenting support given in the Global South through the demonstrations there, the huge demonstrations I've seen pictures of in Amman, in Algiers, in Cairo, in Jakarta, in Pretoria and Johannesburg and Cape Town with respect to this. The absolute unity, I suppose, almost total unity in the third world with respect to the diplomatic voices, the political voices, that gives me hope that they understand this in a colonial context. They understand this not as a struggle over religion, even though it sometimes has that features. This is not a struggle with respect to ethnicity, or sometimes has that features. This is a struggle over rights, and that is so apparent in what the third world or the Global South has been saying.
Thank you so much for those beautiful memories. Okay, I'm going to hand over the mic in a moment. First, though, I was just wondering if all the organizers could stand up for us. Thank you guys for all the amazing work that you did. All right. Thank you guys so much for the amazing organizing. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, John, for allowing me to be a part of this as well. Let's give a big round of applause to the organizers and the panelists.
I'd just like to say that Bethlehem has canceled Christmas this year. But we've got olive oil for our guests, whom we thank for coming. Greyson and Tarek Loubani and Michael Lynk, they're always welcome at our house, and they can move in anytime. Okay.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Did you guys want to? Yeah.